I'm out in Montana. I've captured a police officer. No, I'm just kidding. He's here voluntarily. But I have Conrad Eckert here, who is actually an ex-police officer out here in Montana, who finally had to call it quits because the system is demanding that if you want to be an officer, you violate people's rights. And so we had an interesting conversation, and I just wanted to kind of introduce you guys to him and have him say a few words, because this isn't about hating cops. It's about loving our neighbor and standing up for the rule of law. Why did you have to leave law enforcement?
A lot of politics were involved, but a lot of it was ultimately, like you were saying, I didn't feel I could make a difference anymore. Every time I tried to, politics got in the way, and you always getting discredited or attacked when you would try to stand up for the right thing. So that was kind of the gist of it. And at the end, I was reserve, and my thought process with that was, if I don't try to be full-time law enforcement, and I try to be a reserve leadership in that area, and try to make a difference.
Right.
I don't feel like I can't make this decision. I can't do the right thing because how am I going to feed my family? I had another job, but as a reserve, I felt I could try to make a difference, and ultimately that didn't work out either.
So you were Stevensville PD, and then you were a reserve for the sheriff, and ultimately that led to getting into situations where basically the sheriff was telling you, hey, you need to sweep this under the rug to protect us, and it just got worse and worse.
Essentially, yeah. And it's a common situation all over. I've spoken in depth with Richard Mack a couple of times. I was on a ticket here. It wasn't really announced. I was going to be under sheriff if an individual would have won here a couple elections ago back. And we wanted to make some really differences and make some changes constitutionally and make the officers realize their first oath was to the Constitution of the United States, right, and the laws thereof. Not any law that comes along that they're supposed to enforce. They're the first line of defense. If that law is an unconstitutional or unjust law, they have a duty not to enforce it. And law enforcement now has got to where, well, and I totally understand this, because the badge does something to you. And I'm not saying you're power hungry, but it gives you a feeling of authoritarianism, which it does, but it can be so easily manipulated and abused, which it is. And not all officers are like this, don't get me wrong. I would say at least 98 to 99% of officers, when they get into law enforcement, are there to do the right thing.
Right.
But a lot of them don't even understand the Constitution. The Constitution is not even taught in school anymore, much
right,
less like our conversation with John Bastiat and John Locke.
Right.
Or
Frederick Bastiat. Yeah.
Frederick Bastiat and John Locke. The concepts of this aren't even taught anymore.
So it's not that and that's the thing. I catch a lot of flack for calling out police officers, because I'm like, look, if you're arresting people for possession of guns, possession of anything really, if you're violating their rights, even down to the humble speeding ticket, has become unconstitutional. There's no victim. There's no due process most of the time. The courts, the judges. I mean, so you take somebody into the jail system, and the judges are completely corrupt, and they require that you have a lawyer they approve of, and so all this stuff that goes down, that these officers essentially either have to be complicit with or lose their job. And so my contention is, well, look, I don't hate them. It's not that they're inherently more bad people than anybody else, but they may not be murderers, but they're not good officers just by nature of the fact that they're not upholding that oath, even if they're not bad guys, even if their intentions were right. And I'm trying to understand and help other people understand, this isn't about hating police. I mean, and you kind of just described it. Why do they not understand? I mean, what's going on in these officers? They get in there. It sounds like they get the badge. That's kind of a rush. They have the camaraderie. And then basically it sounds like part of the problem is we're always patting them on the back saying they're heroes, instead of saying, hey man, that's not right. You can't do that. It's wrong. You're putting yourself in a state of aggression against your fellow man.
Well, and I think where we've come to as a society with that is they're the hero, is their job is inherently dangerous. We've hired them to be the buffer and the defender of our rights.
Right.
And not just the defender of our rights versus the common criminal.
Right.
But what about the criminal in government, the tyranny that's going on? They're supposed to be our defender of that. And that's where the problem comes in, is they don't understand, because that system that is writing the laws, essentially is, they're supposed to be enforcing the law, but they're not paying attention to the fact that they took an oath to the Constitution, not just to any willy-nilly law. It's the laws thereof. Yeah. That means of the laws of the Constitution. There are constitutional laws, right? And like we were just explaining earlier, the speeding ticket thing. If some guy's out on the highway and he's doing 80 miles an hour in a 60 mile an hour zone, and he's not endangering anybody, he's not hurting anybody, and you pull him over and you give him a ticket, that's a violation of his Fourth Amendment's right to free passage in this country.
Right.
Who is he hurt? Who is the victim? Show me the victim. Well, the state. The state can't be a victim.
Right. There's
the
no
state
habeas corpus in that.
Right, exactly. And so now at the same time, is that an unjust law? No, not really, but it's that gray area of how you enforce it.
Right. When you enforce something at the point of a gun, when it gets to that point, which is eventually where even the speeding ticket goes if you resist it, right? A gun to your head. At that point, the officer, does he not become the aggressor and render himself to be treated as any other criminal if he's holding me hostage on the side of the road at the point of a gun when I've done no crime against my fellow man?
And that's where I sat back and when I was in law enforcement and really tried to evaluate that. And I came to the conclusion, yes, if I'm violating his rights, he does have the right to resist. I mean, I challenge every law enforcement officer out there. If you're sitting in your home, you're in law enforcement, but all of a sudden a federal agency, some alphabet soup agency, comes knocking on your door for something that is anything trivial you want to say.
Just say a gun crime is they have no right to restrict in the first place.
Right. All of a sudden they made a law that you can't have this type of firearm, and you already had it. Okay, so I'm trying to give you the benefit of the doubt here. You're unbeknownst. All of a sudden something changed, and they know you were there. They come knocking on your door, and you try to resist.
Right.
That's a natural thing. You're gonna, whoa, wait a second, get out of here. They're roughing up your family or whatever. Right. Put yourself in the public's shoes.
Right.
And understand that law that you're trying to enforce, again with that speed limit, if they haven't hurt anybody, they have a right to say, well, get out of my face. I'm not doing anything.
Right.
I know that seems disrespectful, and I am the law. But you're only the law to the point where it's a just and constitutional law.
God created all men equal. You're not better. You're not above because you're
Absolutely.
a cop or a politician or anything.
Absolutely. And in the second you start trying to enforce a law that is a violation of their rights, you now are no different than the common burglar holding a gun to their head.
It's that's essentially the basics.
Because that's what it is. Now all of a sudden you become a revenue enforcement officer.
You're just a thief at the door.
That's what you become. And please, law enforcement, don't take me as I'm against that law enforcement. I 100% support constitutional.
We want them to start enforcing real law.
Absolutely.
And being with us.
We would be in total chaos without law enforcement.
Right.
However,
lawless law enforcement is lawless in chaos.
Right,
now.
right. And this the Black Lives Matter thing, I don't agree with what they're saying, but let's go all lives matter because blue lives matter. Right. I support law enforcement. I'm telling you right now, if I'm on the side of the road and I see some officer
right.
in a situation, and this is the unfortunate thing, it's in me and I can't help it. He may have been violating that person's right, but if I see him in a struggle, I'm going to get out and I'm going to help him. I'm going to at least try to get it calmed down until we can find out what's going on.
Nobody gets hurt.
The best of my ability, right.
Right.
That's the nature of who I am. I can't stop that.
Ultimately in law, it's going to come down to if, we say, yeah, we respect law enforcement, but the moment you're violating someone else's rights, you're no longer law enforcement.
No,
your authority, as John Locke says, ends, and you render yourself to be treated as any other man. You don't have the authority
right.
to violate another man.
Right, and that's what I've tried to explain to some of my current friends still in law enforcement, and but the courts say, I've got that right to enforce it, and it goes out into the courts.
Right.
Problem is when the courts are making the laws are in hand in hand with the courts, they're a violation, making the state a victim that they can't be. Right. The whole thing is chaos. It's just not even. It doesn't make sense.
So lest we go too long in having been over a decade, 15 years as a police officer, something like that,
approximately.
What would you say to all these other people out there that have taken the oath? I mean, we know everybody has rights. Everybody has rights to defend them. It doesn't matter if you're a police officer or if you're a criminal. If you're violating someone's rights, you become the aggressor. But what would you say to the other officers out there who are facing this situation? Because it's just getting worse and worse. The officers are having to choose at this point.
I would say this is what I would say, and this is what I had to do. Whether you're religious or non-religious, pray to your God, whether it be the God of air, I guess. I'd prefer it to be Jesus Christ, but pray to your God that He opens your heart,
right?
Softens your heart, opens your eyes and your mind to really see this and understand it. And not saying I got all the answers, because trust me, I fail daily, I sin daily, I make mistakes, but I see something. My country's falling apart before our eyes. And if something doesn't happen within the next few months, I'm afraid we're not going to have a country. We're going to be under martial law, and then it's going to be free for all.
Right.
And that breaks my heart. It saddens my heart. I would say, sit down, do some serious soul searching on this, and put yourself in the public's shoes when these things happen.
Right.
And what law did they break? Whether it be a speed limit, whether it be they jaywalk,
anything. Yeah.
firearms possession.
Love your neighbor as yourself.
yeah.
Think of him as yourself.
Absolutely, firearms possession. And guys, I hate to say this. This is going to go. You're going to call me a wacko. If you have a felon, and he's paid his debt to society, he's out of jail. What gives us the right, as people that make mistakes daily, as sinners that walk this earth, to now take his right to self-defense away from him forever?
Yeah. It makes no
Now,
sense.
if his heart is so hard, and out of the thousands that do this, if there's one or two that are going to continue to make that mistake with that firearm and be aggressive with it, then they deserve what's coming to them. But now that guy, there's a prior felon, but he has a firearm in his possession to protect himself. He has no ill intent. He's not a criminal. Quit making him a
His
criminal.
debt is paid and his rights are full.
Yes, by all means, by God's law, they should be.
Right.
And that goes back to what John Locke is saying, and the way our founding fathers looked at our society. So I would say, really search and study the Constitution. And when I say this, some people go, you can't take parts away from and everything else. I say this: go back and study what our founding fathers gave us for our Constitution.
Right.
1 through 10. Look at the articles of the Constitution inside there, and look at some of the writings behind that. I know this is a big endeavor, but really look, search your soul, ask God to soften your heart, give you wisdom and grace in this, because you're by taking that oath and putting that badge on, you're in a position of incredible power and authority
And accountability.
And accountability. That accountability is so phenomenal and so great that we need to really soul search and look at this and say, hey, where can I make a difference? And it can be something as simple as, hey, you know what? I can still do my job. I might get in trouble because, hey, you're not writing enough citations and making money for the state. You're not doing this. But enforce the constitutional laws and not the unconstitutional laws.
Right.
There's so many of them out there. And guys, we took an oath, and I took that oath, and I still stand by it. I don't have the badge on anymore, but that's irrelevant. I took an oath to defend the Constitution, and I'm going to do so as much as I can to the best of my ability. But we are the first line of defense, and we're supposed to enforce laws that are constitutional. If a law comes down and we're supposed to enforce it, it's unconstitutional, violates somebody's rights, we're no different than the second we do that, we're no different than a burglar kicking in a stranger's house, kicking in his door. We're no different. So when that person resists you, maybe by the definition of the law today, which is corrupt, you're inside the law, but by God's law, you're outside the law. You become the criminal that fast.
Right.
And that's the accountability you're going to have to answer for someday.
Right.
Whether it be in a court of chaos or in front of your maker. These are things you're going to have to answer for.
Everybody's going to be accountable equally. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it doesn't matter if it's the guy in the ghetto or if it's the White Tower of Hillary Clinton. Everyone's going to be held accountable someday.
Absolutely.
So, and there's two other things that we were discussing earlier, that as law enforcement, if you're in a court of law and you're going to trial on something, I hope to God you're there doing the right thing in trial, enforcing a constitutional law, not just some law to generate revenue or because it's a perceived violation that violates something. But sit there and realize if the jury isn't notified that they have the responsibility of jury nullification.
Right.
If they're there and this law is deemed just and constitutional, then by all means, come across it. Deal with it. If the person's found guilty of breaking it, then by all means, you're 100% perfect. It's a great thing. But if they sit there and they go, he's guilty of this, but that law is unjust.
Right.
They have a duty to jury nullification and wipe that law out.
And so if your judges aren't allowing and presenting that due process, allowing and presenting and allowing the Constitution to be followed in terms of your right to representation and stuff like that, at that point, the officers standing in the courtroom become oath breakers as well, because they're participating in a kangaroo court, essentially.
Absolutely.
And so it all comes down to, you have to choose.
You took
to
an
either
oath.
honor your oath and defend liberty, or become essentially the redcoats and be the aggressor against liberty.
Right, and I understand you have to a paycheck and a job. You got to support your family, but your soul is more important. Your family's soul, because you're worried about your paycheck, and you're willing to violate something because, well, I got to worry about my paycheck. Well, again, that makes you no worse than the common criminal. There's other jobs out there. You can be honorable. Hey guys, a lot of you need work. Hey, I'll help you as much as I can. I'll find you work. You know. And then the last thing is another thing that's never taught anymore is now I'm losing my mind. You've got the first line of defense is your law enforcement. Then you got jury nullification, and the last thing is your grand jury. When's the last time you heard anything about a grand jury in this
all
country?
controlled by
our state constitution was ripped away from us in '72.
Right.
We need to get this going again. That is our defense.
Right.
So law enforcement, I guess what I would say to law enforcement is really research
Right.
this, open your heart, have your heart opened up, and you don't have to quit your job. You just have to quit doing.
You have to stand up and do your job. and
Yes,
become law
exactly.
enforcement.
Do the job you took an oath to, and be true constitutional law enforcement, not just a revenue agent
Yeah.
for the machine.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to run out of battery, but hey, thank you, Conrad. And look, guys, I mean, you know, the issue is not hating anybody. It's about loving our neighbor, speaking the truth to our neighbor. It's about standing up, defending the rule of law. We need law enforcement. We need real law enforcement that will defend the real law, our rights, our God-given rights, the natural law of the Constitution. If we don't have that, we don't have freedom. Thanks, man.